Hello! Today I want to talk about two things. Martin Scorsese is back talking against blockbusters and comic book movies. So I really want to discuss this because I think it's a very important issue, especially with Hollywood being on its knees, because the Writers Guild of America may have come to an agreement with Hollywood studios, broadcasters and streamers, but the actors are still on strike, and they have all voted to go on strike to stop voicing games as well, computer games. So, without the actors, you can write what you want. But anyway, and then I want to talk about something else as well. I want to talk about iconic IPs, iconic characters. Is it right for writers like Chris Terrio and David Goyer and directors like Zack Snyder to change characters like Superman so they're unrecognizable? Is it kind of overzealous to do it? Is it wrong? Or is it right to remold characters for a new generation? It depends how overzealous you're going to be. Anyway, Martin Scorsese is promoting Killers of the Flower Moon, a film that looks absolutely outstanding, and I can't wait to see it on the big screen. Anyway, Marty's back talking against the CBM and the blockbuster, and they're at war. He's saying that filmmakers like Christopher Nolan have saved cinema, and we need more directors like Christopher Nolan. We need more movies like Oppenheimer, movies from directors with a direct vision. And he's worried, Marty, that kids are going to grow up thinking that superhero movies and blockbusters are the only movies that exist. He makes a very interesting point, but this is an argument that's been going since the mid-80s and the influx of the strongman Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Sly Stallone, Van Damme, Steven Seagal, mindless blockbusters that I enjoyed as a kid. There's always been that debate. The only difference now with what Marty's saying is because old-timer directors were saying it in the 80s, and kids like me were saying, oh, fuck off, you old git. The problem is now I'm one of those old gits. I'm 50 years old, and I'm saying that Martin Scorsese is making a great point. But back in the 80s, even though we had an influx of the strongman mindless blockbuster, we still had a variety of art and films. We don't have that anymore. Now, when Martin Scorsese originally did that New York Post article about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he did it because he was vengeful and angry at Disney for acting like gangsters and buying out all the screens, not allowing smaller movies or movies with a direct definitive vision to have a few screens as well and have limited times in the cinema. It's not fair. And so Martin Scorsese spoke out, because when Martin Scorsese speaks, it's not only us, the consumer, that listens, but it's Hollywood that listens as well. We had James Gunn and we had other directors who work within the comic book movie genre that spoke out kind of against Martin Scorsese. Of course they would. Of course they would. And I'd love to know James Gunn's thoughts about all of this, because mainly he's made his name on the comic book movie. So it's interesting, a kind of relatively young director, new kid on the block. What does he think of Martin Scorsese's comments? But anyway, I think right now Hollywood are desperate for more high art. But as I say, this has been a situation, a debate that's been going since the mid-80s. I think as consumers, all we ask for is variety. There's a place for blockbusters, comic book movies, and high art. What happens is that Disney came along with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, elbowed high art out the window, and that's where the problem really arose from. So now Hollywood aren't making money, and the consumer has become numb to the mindless blockbuster because we've had so many CBMs, so many Fast and Furious movies. The Mission Impossible, the latest Mission Impossible movie, Dead Reckoning, didn't make a lot of money. I would say to Tom Cruise, please go back to acting again. Please go back to making films like Jerry Maguire and Vanilla Sky, A Few Good Men. You want answers? I think I'm entitled. I want the truth. Films like that. That's what Tom Cruise is good at. You know, this high octane, adrenaline junkie shit that you've been doing for the past few years, Tom, it's time for it to stop. But audiences want variety. And when the actors come back to work, this is what Hollywood needs to do. There needs to be variety. Because Martin Scorsese is making some very interesting points. He's saying that the industry is done right now. Because once you drip feed a generation full of fast-paced CBMs and blockbusters, you get situations like, oh, there was too much dialogue in this movie, the pacing was all out. Just because there's talking in a movie, they say the pacing is all wrong. They call it pacing. It's crazy. It's crazy that you can't have too much talking in a movie today. But Martin Scorsese is putting it all out there and saying that basically they're at war to save cinema because of the blockbuster. And of course, there's a lot of people who love these comic book movies who are speaking out against Scorsese. Now, I love the comic book movies. As you know, Superman's my favourite character in fiction, but I also want to see high art. I also want movies from directors with something to say, and not just something to say about, women and men and, all of that crap. There's so many things you can say about the world we live in today in a good, intelligent way with nuance. But we have run out of really good directors. Yeah, Christopher Nolan is great. He not only makes great movies, but he makes them look good as well. But then you've got directors like Zack Snyder and Denis Villeneuve who are more adept to making things look good and maybe not necessarily able to get those performances out of an actor. So their movies look good because Denis Villeneuve recently said the future of cinema is IMAX. Well, it's no good giving me IMAX and beautiful movies, Dennis, if the story and the characterizations are not there. And I think it's interesting. You've got Martin Scorsese talking about high art, and you've got Denis Villeneuve talking about IMAX being the future of cinema. I don't mind IMAX being the future of cinema. I don't mind movies looking absolutely stunning and absolutely beautiful. But they've got to be good stories. And we want those great characterizations. Because growing up, Clint Eastwood's westerns didn't have IMAX, but they were great to watch. And they were very interesting character pieces as well at times. We had a variety when I was growing up in the 80s. We don't have that anymore. So I don't think that high art should dominate cinema. I think what Martin Scorsese is saying, you can't have an industry that's just basically selling McDonald's Happy Meals all the time. Disposable content is where we've gone. And we can't just do that because we're seeing this disposable content now flopping at the cinema. Mission Impossible, the latest Mission Impossible, I won't call it a flop, but it didn't make the money they would have wanted it to make. They were dumb. They released it at the same time as the two biggest films of this year in Oppenheimer and Barbie. What a dumb thing to do. And so, what is the answer here? Where do we go from here? How do we make this work? That you just need variety. That's it. It's not high art or blockbusters. It's you need as much high art as you get blockbusters. There's a space for both. You can have your summer blockbusters, and either end of the year, you can have your high art as well. There's money to be made from everything. But the deepest thing that's lacking is talented people to tell these stories, because Martin Scorsese isn't going to live forever. Christopher Nolan isn't going to live forever. You can't live off these directors, right? And I like the fact that we've got a variety of directors like Scorsese, Nolan, Snyder, and Villeneuve. I think there's a place for directors who make things look good and maybe don't have the storytelling nuances of your Scorseses and Nolan, but can do something else. As I say, it's about variety. I want a bit of everything. But where are the new Zack Snyders and Denis Villeneuves? Where are the new Christopher Nolans? Most importantly, where are the new Martin Scorseses? They're in film schools. And back in the 70s, when the original owners of the studios, the Warners, the Xanax, were selling up, they were selling these studios to corporations. Now, these corporations were breweries and things like that. But even they were clever enough to say, right, we want to make movies for young people. So they went to people coming out of film school, like George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, people like that. They were the new age directors. And this is why Hollywood was sustained for so many years, but they don't do that anymore. Instead of the Coppolas, instead of the Scorseses, instead of the Steven Spielbergs, instead of the George Lucases, we've got Taika Waititi, right? And no disrespect to James Gunn, because I think he's a solid, good writer-director, but he's also limited in his ability because he's not a Spielberg, as much as he and his fans may like him to be. He's not a Lucas, he's not a Francis Ford Coppola, he's not a Scorsese, but these are the directors coming through today. And they're simply not good enough to sustain this industry. So what Scorsese is saying is very right and true, that we can't sustain the industry with just mindless blockbusters. But as I say, when we were having this debate in the 80s, with brilliant critics and, speakers and pundits of film like Barry Norman, at least there was still a variety, right? You could go and watch a Godfather movie, then a Back to the Future movie, right? You could go and watch, in the late 80s, you could watch Field of Dreams, which was a very good emotional storytelling high art piece. You could go and watch something in the cinema called Dead Ringers. Again, another brilliant high art piece by the genius that is, David Cronenberg. But then you could go and watch The Running Man, an intelligent, action-packed movie with the strong man that was Arnold Schwarzenegger. You could go and watch a Ghostbusters movie. You could go and watch a Gremlins movie. There was variety. People were thinking outside of the box. You had Ray Liotta in Unlawful Entry. We had different movies, content, movies, whatever you want to call them. We don't have that today. There's no thinking of outside the box. It's reboots, blockbuster CBMs, reboots, more reimaginations. And most of those reimaginations are really, really bad and not making much money at the box office. CBMs now are taking a downturn in the box office because, as I say, the consumer has become numb. So Scorsese makes some very, very valid points. But what I would say to him is, I don't want to see an industry just of blockbusters and CBMs, but just as much, I don't want to see an industry just with high art. I want to see a bit of everything. So yes, we want more directors with definitive visions. We want more movies with definitive visions, but I still want the fun, blockbusters. I still want that escapism. It's all very important. This industry needs rebuilding from the ground up. And what we need desperately is new, young directors coming through, because they're not. It's the same directors. It's the same actors. We want to see new faces. We want to hear new voices in terms of directors and writers. And we're not really getting that because they're not willing to go outside of the Hollywood system to give people a chance. Hollywood is desperate for new voices, but they just keep on giving each other and their family members and their best friends and their godfathers work. And that's the problem with new Hollywood. New Hollywood don't have a clue. The people running the studios don't have a clue. They're not the titans of industry who used to run these studios. Because even the brewery CEOs that owned the studios back then knew enough to bring people in who knew what they were doing, to go to people leaving film schools and giving them a chance to tell their definitive visions and say, let's take a risk on you. If we lose money, we lose money. Let's try. Let's go with your gut feeling. Tell your story. This is what we've lost, because now when movies are made, oh, that person on Twitter said this. You better go back and reshoot that whole scene. That's the problem. This is the mentality that has to change in the industry. Reading David Goya's comments last week and seeing his interview at the Happy Confused podcast or whatever it is, right, with Josh Horowitz, it made me reevaluate the DCEU and the Snyderverse and made me ask a question. Do these overzealous creatives have the right, with their arrogance, to change a character like Superman beyond all recognition? Let's get into it. I remember prior to the release of Man of Steel, Goya himself saying there's no way he would use kryptonite in the movie because it's just a dumb green rock. And that really triggered me, and I thought, Jesus Christ, man, you're so arrogant that you think you're superior to material, to concepts that have lasted the test of time. How dare you? Kryptonite is a really cool thing, because when you've got, an invulnerable character like Superman, you need something to weaken him. Sometimes you use emotional obstacles like Lana or Lois or whatever. And sometimes you have to use kryptonite. Smallville used kryptonite as a character in the first season with the Meteor Freaks. It was a great idea by Alan Miles, and it really worked. So, no, David Goya, kryptonite isn't a stupid green rock, and this is where the problem lied with the Snyderverse and the DCEU. Because they took Superman, because as I say, Goya's comments have really made me reevaluate things. And I'm still a big fan of the Snyderverse, Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice, and the Snyder Cut. That hasn't changed. That will never change. They're great contemporary CBMs. But I want to ask a deeper question. Because it's not just about the Snyderverse. We look what they've done to Star Wars. Was there any need to make, Luke Skywalker Victor Meldrum? I can't bloody believe it, Ray. The Jedi must end, Ridiculous. He was drinking that blue-green titty milk, whatever colour it was. It was ridiculous. They took Luke Skywalker and they destroyed him. Why? Because he was a male. So Rian Johnson, who is part of the extreme left, wanted to make a fool of an iconic straight white male character. They're the true motivations. Now, I'm not saying they were the motivations from Goya, Terrio, and Snyder with Superman. But it's clear when you look at what was done with Man of Steel, what was done with Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice, that there's an attitude and an opinion that these new creatives, right, these new kids on the block think they know more. They're better than the existing material. And they're not. What happened when Man of Steel was released and Superman snapped Zod's neck? It was polarizing. The movie only made $650 million. If that incident didn't happen, it would have made more. Was it that important to have Superman killing Zod, breaking his neck, the most violent way of breaking someone's neck I've ever seen on the big screen? And it's Superman doing it, where Dick Donner and Tom Mankiewicz came onto Superman the movie, because it's very important to remember Superman the movie was being directed by Guy Hamilton, the Bond director, in Italy. Then what happened was, because they basically had Marlon Brando playing Jor-El, all of a sudden the Italian government wanted to sue Bertolucci and Brando for The Last Tango in Paris, and Brando's saying, are you fucking crazy? I'm not staying here. I'm not going to Italy. But Guy Hamilton was a tax exile in the UK, where the Sorkines wanted to go and direct Superman the movie. So it was a horrible decision. It's Guy Hamilton and Marlon Brando. Obviously, you choose Marlon Brando. And then Dick Donner came on and brought on Tom Mankiewicz, who was his best mate, to rewrite the entire picture. Don't forget, Mario Puzo wrote a screenplay for Superman the movie before Dick Donner came on. And Tom came on and rewrote it. And Dick Donner said, listen, you can have the best looking film ever. And Tom Mankiewicz said this, but you can have the best VFX and it can look beautiful. That may make a great trailer, but it doesn't make a great movie. Think on that, Denis Villeneuve fans and Zack Snyder fans. It's a very good point. So the VFX, the stunning VFX in Superman the movie, because it was stunning, It was state of the art for 1970 fucking 8. Even yesterday watching it, happy birthday to Christopher Reeve, who would have been 71 yesterday. So I was watching Superman the movie to commemorate my legends and my hero. Because he didn't just make Superman my hero, he personally became my hero as well. That's how important Christopher Reeve was. There'll be this age-old debate that's been going for years. Who's the greatest Superman? And everyone has their different views. For me, there is no debate. It's Christopher Reeve. I can admire the other actors. I don't think there's a bad Superman actor. But at the end of the day, Christopher Reeve is very top for me. And that's the end of the debate for me. Now, going back to what I'm talking about. So Dick Donner said, we're not smarter than the material. Dick Donner actually said this. So let's create two kids on a date. Let's create a love story while Superman is being Superman. And the film works. Now, of course, today, if you're going to do that, you have to have faster pacing, less dialogue, but you can still do it if you do it in the right way. But you can't copy and paste that movie. It wouldn't work today. We've had that discussion before. But I ask you the question, and I continue to ask you the question, is it right for these overzealous creatives to take Superman and Batman and Luke Skywalker and go, let's change them, let's stretch them, let's make them different? Because if Superman ends up being like Damien from The Omen, when every time he uses his heat vision, his eyes just burn out red, and he's snapping people's necks, and he's screaming as he goes to punch someone, is he even Superman anymore? If he doesn't care about collateral damage going on around him, does he, is he still Superman? And the thing is, Zack Snyder said a very famous thing at SnyderCon. Get the fuck real, he said. But who told you, Zack, that we want to get the fuck real? When it comes to Superman, when it comes to Batman, when it comes to Wonder Woman, who told you we wanted to get the fuck real? The problem is with creatives today, they're obsessed with realism. Not escapism, realism. Think about that for a minute. Why do you think so many people are attempting suicide, considering suicide, self-harming, suffering with mental illness and depression? Because there's no longer any escapism for the kids or the adults. It's all about realism. Zack Snyder, about realism. Matt Reeves, realism. Denis Villeneuve, realism. They're all realism creatives. Ryan Johnson, the same. So where are the directors who can give us this escapism? So I think, in terms of what James Gunn's planning for Superman Legacy, it will be more fantastical, and the DCU will be more fantastical, and there'll be more escapism. Because people are crying out for escapism. Because there's far too many creatives who are obsessed with realism. Now, I don't mind realism in my movies. As I said earlier, in the Martin Scorsese debate, there's a place for variety. There's a place for escapism and realism. And that's fine. But when you're only hiring directors obsessed with realism, it's no damn good. And directors, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to get me hate, that want to bring realism to a character like Superman have no place making Superman. I love Henry Cavill's Superman. I love what Zack Snyder did with Man of Steel. The contemporary way that they dealt with Superman doesn't bother me personally, but it bothered a lot of Superman fans. It bothered a lot of Batman fans because it does stem with a lot of arrogance that I know better than Siegel and Schuster. I will give you another example. When they had the premiere, the big premiere in America for Superman the movie, the creators of Superman, Siegel and Schuster, presented Dick Donner with the iconic gold statue of Superman. Siegel and Schuster, the creators, saw the movie, loved it, and were crying as they gave it to Donner, which made Donner cry as well. What do you think Siegel and Schuster would have made of Man of Steel? Think about it. Even if you like it, even if you're biased. I like Man of Steel. But think about what they would have thought, what was done to their hero. The character that they created to inspire young people to not feel weak, that they can't do anything about bullies and crime. Because, of course, One of the Siegel, I think it was Siegel or Schuster, their father died in a, in a botched up burglary or bank job or whatever it was. This is one of the reasons that they created Superman. But look, when Siegel and Schuster did create Superman, he wasn't as kind of pure and smiley, if you like, grabbing cats from trees, as he would be, a few years later. He was a bit more gruff. He was beating up, cruel employees who were treating employers who were treating their employees badly, men who were beating up women and things like that. He wasn't kind of a status quo kind of superhero. He was a social justice warrior, not the ones we see today, by the way, but one that cared about the weak and the downtrodden. If I was making a Superman film, I would be directly adapting Siegel and Schuster's concept of Superman. But we've got too many creatives today thinking they're better than the existing material, and that's the problem. Then if it's not that, you've got these other extremists with their propagandas, trying, to be anti-male, and things like that. Hollywood needs to go back to helping people escape their everyday lives. I know as a young man who was being bullied at school, who had so many different issues, mental health issues, dyslexia, being bullied at school, I needed an escape. Christopher Reeve's Superman helped me escape. Back to the Future helped me escape. There is no escapism anymore. So these types of movies, these superhero movies, need directors. They need creatives who are willing to take us somewhere better, right? So keeping Superman and Batman in the real world does nothing for me. Yes, I love Man of Steel and BVS, but I prefer those characters to be in their own world. I don't want Superman in the real world. We'd love a Superman in the real world, but listen, we want Superman to be in that fantasy world and to be a little bit silly and have his silly disguise that makes no sense. It's okay. Because the problem with creatives like Zack Snyder, like David Goyer, who doesn't like kryptonite, they lack imagination and they're obsessed with the world around them. This is why creatives keep on being so political and bringing real world issues into characters and universes they have no right to do. And this is the issue, and this is one of the reasons why Hollywood is losing so much money. There's many, many reasons. The issues that Martin Scorsese brings up are very, very true. But we still need blockbusters and we still need great escapism, which is what we don't get today. So no, I'd rather Superman not be changed into someone that kills, someone that growls and barks when he's going after a villain. I want Superman to be Superman. And the beauty of Dick Donner and Tom Mankiewicz, they looked at Superman and they said, we're not better than the existing material. The audience don't want us to think we're better than the existing material. Let's make Superman be Superman. So a lot of Snyder fans keep on talking about the cat on the tree. That's not all Superman was in Superman the movie and in the comics. He's a lot more than that. And isn't it interesting? If you go back and watch Superman in the movie, a lot of the VFX stands up today. There's a beautiful sequence of Superman flying after the missile. Brilliant. The way Christopher Reeve moves his body is part of the special effects. He was a special effect in himself because he was a glider pilot, so he knew how to move his body. He was very, very special, Christopher Reeve. And that sequence stands up today. It's still a visual masterpiece with no CGI whatsoever. Let's think about Dick Donner. He has a sequence of the Fortress of Solitude rising. Now, Zack Snyder doesn't even have a Fortress of Solitude. Clearly, Zack doesn't think that's important. It's very important. But Dick Donner, in the 70s, in 76, 77, when he was making that movie, could have cheated. He didn't have to have all the ice rising up so slowly. Do you realise how much money and how much time and how many groundbreaking effects they had to create to even do just that? Never mind the flying. And Dick could have cut corners. The producers of Salkinds would have welcomed that. They fired him for spending too much money to make the movie as good as possible, to break new ground. So they wouldn't have cared, but Dick Donner wanted to do things properly, and they did do things properly. And this is exactly what Superman Legacy needs. It's time to stop stretching existing iconic characters and portray them the way they was always supposed to be.